1938. The Royal Navy launches a new destroyer. On paper, she displaces 1,854 tons. She carries 8 4.7-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, superfiring fore and aft, delivering a full broadside of 400 pounds. That is roughly half the broadside of a light cruiser, packed into a hull 1/4 the size. No armour, no pretense of protection, just raw, concentrated firepower that made foreign admiralties nervous. The Admiralty called her a destroyer. Norman Friedman, one of the most respected naval historians alive, called her something else entirely. He said the tribal class were not really destroyers. They were unarmoured scout cruisers. He was right, and the tribals were only the beginning. Over the next 35 years, the Royal Navy would build 5 classes of warships, it stubbornly labelled destroyers, each one larger than the last, each one absorbing the roles and firepower of the cruisers they were supposedly inferior to. By 1973, the final entry on this list displaced 7,100 tons, and Jane's fighting ships openly called her a light cruiser. The Royal Navy still called her a destroyer. This is the story of 5 British warships that outgunned everything in their class. Ranked by firepower, let us begin. But first, you need to understand why this kept happening. The answer is money, treaties, and politics. The 1930 London Naval Treaty placed strict limits on destroyer construction, capping individual ships at 1,850 tons standard displacement, with guns no larger than 5.1 inches, while also setting total tonnage allowances per navy across different warship categories. Cruisers had their own separate limits and far higher costs. So if you wanted cruiser firepower but could not afford cruiser budgets, you squeezed that capability into a destroyer hull and called it a destroyer. The Admiralty got very good at this. By the Cold War, when the treaties were long dead, the habit stuck. Not because of treaty limits anymore, but because the word cruiser had become politically toxic. Classification followed budgets, not capabilities. Every class on this list exploited that gap between what a ship was called and what a ship could do. Starting from number 5, the first on our list is the tribal class. 16 ships built between 1936 and 1938. They displaced 1,854 tons standard, 2,519 tons at full load, 377 feet long, 36.5-foot beam, 13.5-foot draft. 3 Admiralty 3-drum boilers drove 2 Parsons geared steam turbines, producing 44,000 shaft horsepower on 2 shafts. Maximum speed, 36 knots. Range, approximately 5,700 nautical miles at 15 knots. The guns defined everything about this class. 8 QF, 4.7-inch Mark 12 guns in 4, twin CP-19 mountings, arranged in super-firing pairs fore and aft. Each gun fired a 50-pound shell at 10 to 12 rounds per minute to a maximum range of 16,970 yards. Secondary armament included 1 quadruple 2-pounder pom-pom, 2 quadruple Vickers .50 caliber machine guns, and 1 quadruple 21-inch torpedo tube mount. Just 4 torpedoes. That was the sacrifice that paid for all those guns. Now here is where the tribal class earned its place on this list. A full broadside weighed 400 pounds. A Leander-class light cruiser with 8 6-inch guns firing 112-pound shells delivered an 896-pound broadside. So the tribal threw roughly 45% of a cruiser's broadside weight, but rate of fire changes the equation. At 10 to 12 rounds per minute, a tribal's sustained weight of fire reached 4,000 to 4,800 pounds per minute. The Leander managed 5,300 to roughly 7,100 pounds per minute. That means a single tribal-class destroyer delivered between 67 and 89% of a light cruiser's sustained firepower on 1/4 of the displacement, without a single inch of armour plate. The tribals were a direct response to foreign super-destroyers that were making conventional British destroyers obsolete. Japan's Fubuki class, launched in 1928, carried 6 5-inch guns in twin turrets and 9 torpedo tubes. Germany's Z-class destroyers were growing larger and more heavily armed. France and Italy were building contre-torpilleurs and esploratori that blurred the line between destroyer and cruiser. The design originated from a 1934 study called Design 5, a concept for a small fleet cruiser. A parallel variant of that same study became the Dido-class anti-aircraft cruiser. The tribal was designed to sit right at the 1,850-ton treaty ceiling. Technically a destroyer, practically absorbing the scouting and gun action roles that had belonged to cruisers for decades. The tribals paid for their aggression in blood. 12 of 16 Royal Navy tribals were sunk. HMS Cossack boarded the German tanker Altmark in Norwegian waters in February 1940, rescuing 300 British prisoners of war in the last true Royal Navy boarding action. At the Second Battle of Narvik in April 1940, Eskimo had her bow blown off by a torpedo and survived. During the Bismarck chase in May 1941, Zulu, Sikh, Cossack and Maori harried the crippled battleship with torpedo attacks through the night. Only Ashanti, Eskimo, Tartar and Nubian survived the war. Half a cruiser's firepower, 1/4 of the displacement, 0 armour, 12 ships lost. The tribal class was a destroyer doing a cruiser's job. It did that job aggressively and it paid the price. At number 4, we have the battle class, built between 1943 and 1946. The 1942 group displaced 2,315 tons standard, 3,290 tons full load, 379 feet long, 40-foot 3-inch beam, 2 Admiralty 3 drum boilers and 2 Parsons geared steam turbines produced 50,000 shaft horsepower for 34 knots. Range, approximately 4,400 nautical miles at 12 knots. The armament layout was revolutionary. 4 QF 4.5-inch Mark III dual-purpose guns in 2 twin BD, Mark IV turrets, both mounted forward in super-firing positions. Every main gun could engage a single aerial target ahead. No other British destroyer had this arrangement. The light anti-aircraft battery was extraordinary. Up to 8 twin 40mm Bofors on radar, directed Haysmire mounts, plus 4 to 6 single 40mm Bofors, totaling as many as 14 Bofors guns. That was heavier light anti-aircraft armament than many contemporary cruisers carried. The 1943 group ships were slightly larger at 2,480 tons standard, 3,430 tons full load. They added a 5th 4.5-inch gun in a single amidships mount, 2 quintuple torpedo tube banks giving 10 torpedoes, and the advanced Stag stabilised anti-aircraft mounts with centimetric Type 262 lock-on radar. These were the first British destroyers fitted with stabilisers. Denny Brown fin stabilisers reducing roll by 80%, creating a far steadier gunnery platform. The battles were born from brutal necessity. British destroyers suffered catastrophic losses to air attack in 1940 and 1941, at Narvik, at Dunkirk, at Crete, across the Mediterranean. Previous destroyer guns limited to 40 degrees of elevation were useless against dive bombers. With the planned Pacific offensive against Japan approaching, the Navy needed destroyers that could survive massed air attack and kamikaze strikes. The all-forward gun arrangement, dual-purpose capability, and massive Bofors battery under radar control made the battle class the most capable anti-aircraft destroyers in the world. Only HMS Barfleur saw combat in World War II, serving with the British Pacific Fleet and present in Tokyo Bay for the Japanese surrender. The class proved its longevity through decades of post-war service. HMAS Anzac and Tobruk served in the Korean War. Pakistan Navy ship Khyber, formerly HMS Cadiz, was sunk by Indian missile attack during the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War, one of the first major warships destroyed by anti-ship missiles. 14 Bofors guns, dual-purpose main armament, radar-directed fire control, more anti-aircraft firepower than many contemporary cruisers could match. The battle class was a destroyer built to survive what had been killing destroyers. Moving on to number 3, we have the Daring class. 8 ships built between 1949 and 1954. These displaced 2,830 tons standard, 3,820 tons full load, 390 feet overall, 43-foot beam. The propulsion was revolutionary for the conservative Royal Navy, with Foster Wheeler boilers operating at 650 pounds per square inch and 850 degrees Fahrenheit, driving 2 Parsons geared steam turbines, producing 54,000 shaft horsepower, maximum speed approximately 30.5 knots, range 4,400 nautical miles at 20 knots. But it is the guns that matter here. 6 QF 4.5-inch Mark V guns in 3 twin RP-41 Mark VI turrets, 2 super-firing forward, 1 aft. Each gun fired a 55-pound shell with full dual-purpose capability to 80 degrees elevation. Maximum range, 20,750 yards. Fire control used a Mark VI director with Type 275 radar forward and a CRBF director with Type 262 radar aft. The anti-aircraft battery comprised 640mm Bofors in 3 twin Stag, Mark II stabilised mounts. Torpedo armament was 10 21-inch tubes in 2 quintuple mounts. Light armour plating of 3/8 of an inch protected turrets, bridge, and fire control cable runs. Here is the statistic that earns the Daring class this rank. At its realistic rate of fire, 12 to 16 rounds per minute per gun, the class delivered a sustained weight of fire between roughly 3,960 and 5,280 pounds per minute. A Dido-class anti-aircraft cruiser with 8 5.25-inch guns firing 80-pound shells at 7.5 rounds per minute delivered approximately 4,800 pounds per minute. At its best, a single 2,830-ton Daring exceeded the weight of fire of a 5,500-ton light cruiser. If you are enjoying this deep dive into Royal Navy engineering, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and ensures you do not miss the next one. D.K. Brown of the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors commented that the Darings finally gave the Royal Navy a modern destroyer with a longitudinally framed welded hull, efficient machinery, AC electrics, and an effective dual-purpose armament. He noted these innovations were introduced a decade later than in the United States Navy. The Daring served across the Mediterranean, Home Fleet, and Far East through the 1950s and 1960s. Several participated in the Suez Crisis of 1956, providing escort and gunfire support. Ships deployed during the Indonesian confrontation from 1963 to 1966 for coastal bombardment and escort duties. The class suffered one catastrophic loss. HMAS Voyager was rammed and sunk by carrier HMAS Melbourne on February 10, 1964, killing 82 crew. 2 ships were sold to Peru. The former HMS Doris, renamed BAP Foray, served until 2007 as the last operational Daring worldwide. A destroyer that could match a cruiser's weight of fire at half the tonnage. The Daring class did not just blur the line between destroyer and cruiser, it made the line irrelevant. All right, we are down to the top 2. At number 2, we have the County-class guided missile destroyers, 8 ships built in 2 batches between 1962 and 1970. They displaced approximately 6,200 tons standard, 6,900 tons full load. That is virtually identical to a World War II Dido-class light cruiser, 520 feet long, 54-foot beam, 21-foot draft. The combined steam and gas propulsion system paired 2 Babcock and Wilcox boilers with geared steam turbines producing 30,000 shaft horsepower and 4 Metropolitan Vickers G6 gas turbines producing another 30,000 shaft horsepower, totaling 60,000 shaft horsepower for 30 knots. Range, 3,500 nautical miles. Crew complement, 471, larger than many World War II cruisers. The primary weapon was the Sea Slug surface-to-air missile fired from a twin launcher aft. Batch 1 ships carried the GWS-1 system with Sea Slug Mark I, beam riding guidance, approximately 27-kilometer range, subsonic. Batch 2 ships received the GWS-2 with Sea Slug Mark II, approximately 32-kilometer range, supersonic at Mach 2+, with a secondary anti-ship capability codenamed Micawber. Missile capacity ranged from 24 to 28 rounds for Batch 1 up to 39 operational rounds for Batch 2. Gun armament was 4 4.5-inch guns in 2 twin Mark N6 mountings forward. 2 GWS-22 Seacat short-range surface-to-air missile launchers provided close-in defence, making the Counties the first Royal Navy ships to carry 2 different guided missile types. Batch 2 ships later received 4 MM-38 Exocet anti-ship missiles replacing the second turret, making them the only Royal Navy ships simultaneously armed with 3 types of guided missile. Here is why the County class ranks this high. Lord Mountbatten deliberately classified them as guided missile destroyers rather than cruisers because the word cruiser had become politically toxic, branded in the media as colonial relics and obsolete gunships. The Royal Navy staff privately regarded them as cruisers. The ships received names from previous cruiser classes to signal their true status. The Director of Naval Construction designed them with flag accommodation and an admiral's barge stowage. At 6,200 tons standard, they were larger than Soviet Kinder-class missile cruisers at 4,400 tons, and comparable to American Lee-class frigates that were later reclassified as cruisers in 1975. The destroyer label allowed 8 ships to be funded where only 4 proper cruisers could have been afforded. 2 County-class ships deployed to the Falklands in 1982. HMS Antrim served as flagship for Operation Paracay, the recapture of South Georgia, in April 1982. Her Wessex helicopter, known by the nickname Humphrey, performed the legendary rescue of 16 SAS men from Fortuna Glacier in whiteout conditions. Antrim was later hit by a 1,000-pound bomb that failed to explode. HMS Glamorgan spent weeks on the gun line bombarding Port Stanley Airfield and fired Sea Slug in Macabre mode against an Argentine radar installation, one of the few times a long-range surface-to-air missile was used in the anti-surface role in combat. On June 12, 1982, Glamorgan was struck by a shore-launched Exocet missile that destroyed her hangar, killing 13 crew and wounding 22. The captain's rapid evasive action, turning the ship's stern toward the incoming missile at the last moment, narrowly prevented the warhead from hitting the Sea Slug magazine. Had it detonated there, among 39 missiles and their propellant, Glamorgan would have been lost. Instead, she steamed home under her own power and continued in service until 1986. 6,200 tons, 471 crew, 3 types of guided missile, flag accommodation for an admiral, built to destroyer scantlings and supply standards, but absorbing every role a cruiser once filled, and finally, at number 1, the top of our list, HMS Bristol. The 7,100-ton destroyer that Jane's fighting ships called a light cruiser. Commissioned in 1973, HMS Bristol was the sole Type 82 destroyer. She displaced approximately 6,400 tons standard, 7,100 tons full load. Larger than any Royal Navy destroyer before her in the conventional sense, 507 feet long, 55-foot beam, her unique combined steam and gas propulsion paired 2 Babcock and Wilcox boilers with geared steam turbines producing 30,000 shaft horsepower and 2 Rolls-Royce Olympus, TM1 gas turbines producing 44,000 shaft horsepower. Total output, approximately 74,000 shaft horsepower on 2 shafts, giving 28 to 30 knots and a range of 5,750 nautical miles at 18 knots. She was the last Royal Navy warship designed with steam propulsion. Crew, approximately 400. Bristol's weapons suite was the most diverse of any British destroyer. The Sea Dart GWS-30 system, a twin-arm launcher with 38 semi-active radar homing missiles, could engage targets at speeds around Mach 2.5 out to approximately 40 miles, guided by 2 Type 909 illumination radars enabling simultaneous engagement of 2 targets. The Ikara anti-submarine weapon used a rocket-propelled delta-winged vehicle to deliver a homing torpedo up to 10 nautical miles from the ship, carrying 24 rounds. A single 4.5-inch Vickers Mark 8 gun, the first installation of this type, fired 25 rounds per minute. The ADAWS 2 combat direction system, built around 2 Ferranti FM 1600 computers, represented a generational leap in automated warfare capability. Sea Dart, Ikara, a rapid-fire gun, anti-submarine mortars, electronic countermeasures. No other British destroyer carried this breadth of weaponry. Bristol was originally one of 4 to 8 Type 82 destroyers, planned as escorts for the CVA-01 Fleet Carrier program. The idea was simple. Britain's new fleet carriers needed large, capable escorts armed with the latest weapons and sensors. The Type 82 was designed to provide area air defense with Sea Dart and standoff anti-submarine protection with Ikara, all coordinated through the ADAWS-2 automated combat system. Then politics intervened. When the 1966 Defence White Paper cancelled CVA-01, deemed too expensive at £56 million per carrier, the rationale for the costly Type 82 evaporated overnight. Without fleet carriers to escort, there was no justification for a 7,000-ton destroyer. One hull was completed primarily as a testbed for Sea Dart, Ikara, the Mark 8 gun, and a DAWS-2, all of which would equip the smaller, cheaper Type 42 destroyers that replaced the class. Bristol cost approximately 3 times as much as a Leander-class frigate. At 7,100 tons, Bristol was larger than Soviet Kinder-class missile cruisers at 5,600 tons full load. She was comparable to Soviet Cresta 1-class cruisers at 7,500 tons. She matched American ships that were officially reclassified from frigates to cruisers in 1975. Jane's fighting ships, the authoritative Global Naval Reference, described Bristol as a light cruiser in its 1980-81 edition. The destroyer designation persisted because the ship was built to destroyer scantlings and supply standards, and because the word cruiser remained politically unacceptable in post-Suez Britain. Bristol led the Bristol Group of reinforcement ships south during the Falklands War, then joined the Carrier Battle Group. After HMS Coventry was sunk on May 25, 1982, Bristol assumed air warfare duties alongside Cardiff and Exeter. When flagship HMS Hermes departed, Bristol became flagship of the task force under Vice Admiral Derek Reffel, serving as senior ship in theatre until September 17, 1982. She later served as a Dartmouth training squadron ship before becoming a static training vessel at Portsmouth in 1993, finally decommissioning on October 28, 2020, after 47 years of nominal service. 7,100 tons, 38 Sea Dart missiles, 24 Ikara anti-submarine rounds, a rapid-fire 4.5-inch gun, flag capability for an admiral. Jane's called her a light cruiser. The Royal Navy called her a destroyer. She was both and neither, and exactly what the Navy needed when it could not afford to call things what they were. The pattern across these 5 classes is unmistakable. The Royal Navy spent a century building destroyers that kept absorbing the roles cruisers once filled. Pre-World War I torpedo boat destroyers averaged 300 to 400 tons. The V&W class of World War I reached 1,100 tons. Interwar destroyers settled around 1,350 tons. The Tribals jumped to 1,854. The battles reached 2,300 to 2,480. The Darings hit 2,830. The Counties leapt to 6,200. Bristol peaked at 6,400 standard. Even today's Type 45 destroyers displace 7,350 to 8,500 tons full load. 3 forces drove this relentless growth. The Royal Navy's global empire required multi-role escorts capable of independent operations far from home, not just fleet screens. As cruisers became prohibitively expensive, destroyers were progressively enlarged to absorb scouting, shore bombardment, and flagship duties. And foreign navies, particularly Japan's Fubuki class in the 1920s and France's contre-torpilleur, periodically built super destroyers that forced the Royal Navy to respond with larger designs. But above all, the budget shaped the labels. The 1930 London Naval Treaty set the limits that made the tribal class necessary. After the treaties expired, classification became purely political. Mountbatten called the counties destroyers because calling them cruisers would have killed them in Parliament. Bristol inherited the same logic. This was not uniquely British. The United States Navy simultaneously classified its Leahy and Belknap classes as frigates, despite cruiser displacement, only reclassifying them as cruisers in the 1975 reorganisation. Norman Friedman's observation that the Tribals were not really destroyers applies with equal force to every class on this list. The Royal Navy did not build destroyers that should have been battleships. It built warships that absorbed cruiser firepower, cruiser roles, and cruiser displacement, then called them something the Treasury would approve. The specifications prove it. The combat records confirm it. Consider the trajectory. The Tribal class achieved roughly half a light cruiser's broadside at 1/4 the displacement. The Battle class packed more anti-aircraft firepower than many contemporary cruisers could match. The Daring class matched a Dido-class cruiser's weight of fire at half the tonnage. The County class displaced more than a World War II light cruiser, while carrying guided weapons those cruisers' designers never imagined. And Bristol, Jane's own light cruiser, outweighed Soviet missile cruisers while bearing the politically convenient label of destroyer. British naval architecture solved a problem no other navy managed as consistently. How do you maintain cruiser-grade capability when your government will not pay for cruisers? You call them destroyers. You push every treaty limit. You pack every hull with more firepower than anyone expects, and you send them into battle where they perform the roles cruisers once owned. That is not deception. That is engineering excellence under political constraint. And across a century of warship design, nobody did it better than the Royal Navy.